The wind moved like breath through the arroyos, carrying with it the hiss of dry grass and the distant thrum of hooves. High above, hawks carved circles into a pale, heartless sky. Down below, beneath the cracked lip of a rock face the locals called Widow's Spite, a lone wagon strained under the weight of two lives trying to outrun themselves. Clara sat on the edge of the buckboard, her fingers curled tight around the leather reins. Her hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes that had seen too much in too few years. The desert had a way of bleaching things down to their bones, memory, hope, even regret, and she'd come west with every intention of being hollowed out clean. But the man beside her had other thoughts. His name was Eli Mercer, a former Union scout with hands that still trembled when he believed no one noticed. He promised her peace, the way men do when they love too hard and too soon. Promised a patch of land near Salt River where the mesquite grew thick and the nights came soft. Promised her quiet, a place to rest her voice and lay down the ghosts that stalked her footsteps from Missouri to Kansas and now out into this sunburned silence. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough with wind and road. He didn't look at her when he said it. Eli had a way of speaking into the horizon, as if afraid turning back might undo him. Clara didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she nodded once, small and tight, the kind of nod that said not really, but keep going anyway. Their wagon crested a low rise, and beyond it stretched the town of Larkspur, sun-bitten and yawning. A line of buildings stitched loosely along a single road, all leaning inward like a prayer whispered in wood and rusted nails. The church steeple was cracked, the saloon roof sagged. Even from a distance, Clara could feel the way the place held its breath. They rode in slow, past a group of boys tossing stones at a rail fence, their laughter brittle and sharp. A woman in a blue dress watched them from a porch, one hand on her hip, the other holding a cloth to her mouth. Her eyes followed Clara like a warning. "Place has seen better days," Eli muttered, guiding the horses toward the livery. He eased the team to a halt and jumped down, his boots kicking up a small storm of red dust. He moved with a soldier's weariness, his body still remembering trenches and midnight raids. But his hands were gentle as he reached up to help Clara down. "I can manage," she said, more out of habit than pride. Her voice was low, cracked with disuse, the kind of voice that didn't rise unless it had to. "I know," he replied, not moving, "but you don't have to." There was something in that, something quiet and warm, that made her pause. In the end, she let him steady her as she stepped down, boots sinking slightly into the baked earth. For a breath, they stood close, and in that stillness, Clara felt something stir just beneath her ribs. Not love, not yet, but maybe the shape of it, maybe the idea. They unloaded what little they had, a trunk of books, a battered rifle, a pot Eli swore could stew rattlesnake into something near edible. The room they'd rented above the old mercantile was small, but it had a window that faced west and a bed big enough for two bodies trying not to dream too loud. By dusk, the town came to life in its own hushed way. Lamps glowed behind shuttered glass. The saloon piano coughed out a tune missing half its notes. From the church, a bell tolled 6 times, the sound hollow but determined. Eli stood by the window, smoking. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, unlacing her boots with slow, practiced fingers. Neither spoke for a long time. "You think we'll find it here?" she asked finally, not looking up. "Peace." Eli didn't answer right away. She heard the scrape of his matchbox, the inhale of smoke. Then softly, "We'll make it, one way or another." Outside, the wind shifted, carried with it the faint scent of creosote and something else, something older. Clara stiffened. Her hands stopped moving. "I saw someone," she said, "at the edge of town by the blacksmith's, looked like." She stopped herself, let the words die before they became too real. Eli turned from the window. "Like who?" She shook her head. "No one. Just a shadow." He didn't press, just walked over, sat beside her, close enough for her to feel the heat of him. The bed creaked beneath their weight. "You're safe," he said. Clara closed her eyes. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to let the desert strip her down until nothing was left but the woman she could have been before blood and fire rewrote her name. But peace was not a place. It was a choice, and the past was not through with her yet. That night, as the wind howled through the narrow alleys of Larkspur and the coyotes sang their lonely songs to the stars, Clara dreamed of fire. Not the wild kind, but the slow, smoldering burn of something waiting, watching. When she woke, her palms were damp, and her heart thundered in her chest. The desert had made her a promise once too, and it had lied. Morning bled into the room through a rip in the curtain, casting a pale ribbon across the wooden floorboards. Clara sat on the edge of the bed with her knees drawn close, a cup of black coffee cooling in her hands. Eli was downstairs, speaking with the shopkeep about fence wire and flour. She could hear his voice faintly, low and measured. A voice trying to fit into a place it didn't belong yet. The town moved slowly, as if afraid to wake something beneath its own dust. Outside the window, a dog padded down the road with a limp, nose to the ground. Across the street, the saloon owner hauled a crate inside with one hand, wiping his brow with the other. Life here wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The quiet said enough. Clara pulled on her boots and stepped out into the heat. The day was already leaning toward harsh. Larkspur had no shade to speak of, only shadows that clung to the underside of buildings like secrets. Her steps took her toward the well behind the church. She hadn't meant to go there, not really, but her feet remembered the shape of paths long before her mind gave them meaning. The preacher stood there already, cranking the old pulley, a bucket rising slow as a prayer. He looked up at her, squinting into the sun. "Water's clean this week," he said. "We got lucky." Clara gave a nod. He was younger than she expected, skin browned from the sun but soft around the mouth, like he hadn't learned yet how to hide what he felt. "I'm Clara," she said, "new in town." "I know," he replied. "Preacher Ames. I saw you ride in yesterday." She dipped her tin cup into the bucket and drank, the water cold and metallic. Behind them, the chapel stood still and empty, the door slightly ajar. "You don't preach much," she said, "not unless there's something worth saying." She looked at him then, really looked. There was something in his eyes that caught her, not attraction but recognition. He knew about the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, the kind that came after screaming. She handed him the cup and turned to leave, but he spoke again. "If you're looking for peace," he said, "you won't find it in stillness. You'll find it in the trying." Clara didn't answer. She walked back down the street, boots stirring the red dust, her shadow stretching long and thin behind her. Back at the room, Eli was spreading maps across the table. He looked up when she entered, the worry in his eyes buried deep but not gone. "I found us a place," he said, 10 miles out past the canyon edge. Land's dry, but there's a spring nearby. They say the soil's good enough if you're patient." Clara came to stand beside him. The map was yellowed and torn at the corners, but someone had drawn careful lines in pencil, tracing a square of possibility into the wilderness. "We can ride out tomorrow," he said. "See if it feels right." Clara nodded. It was all she could give. That night they ate together in silence, beans and cornbread, rough but filling. Eli told her about the man at the store, how he used to be a cavalry captain before his lungs gave out, how half the folks in Larkspur had come here looking for something they'd lost somewhere else. After, they sat on the porch of the mercantile, watching the stars bleed out of the sky one by one. "Heard a name today," Eli said, his voice soft. "Tanner Graves. You ever know anyone by that?" Clara froze. The night around them held its breath. "Where'd you hear that?" "Saloon, old fella with a limp said Graves passed through a week back, asked about you." Clara looked out into the dark, past the end of the street where the land fell away into scrub and shadow. Her fingers curled tight around the arms of her chair. "Is he here?" Eli shook his head. "Don't think so, not yet." A long silence passed between them. "Tanner wasn't the kind to stay gone," Clara said at last. "Not if he thinks there's something left to claim." Eli looked at her then, the way a man looks at a woman who's lived through something he can't name. And still, he said nothing of fear or danger. "Only we'll be ready." But Clara knew better than to think readiness was armor. The past didn't knock when it came. It cracked the door open with blood on its hands and memories in its teeth. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window, rifle across her lap, watching the town below flicker into stillness. The moon hung low, like a blade just before the swing. She thought of the promise Eli made. And she wondered what peace ever meant to a woman who'd once pulled the trigger on her own brother. The desert hadn't forgotten, and neither had she. They left at first light, the wagon creaking under its own age, wheels rattling like old bones across stone and root. The desert stretched wide ahead of them, golden and cruel. It offered no road, only direction, and even that shifted underfoot. Clara rode beside Eli in silence, the rifle tucked behind her seat, wrapped in cloth but never out of reach. Behind them, Larkspur shrank into the haze, its church steeple the last thing to vanish into heat shimmer. The stillness out here was different, less suffocating, more alert. Every rustle of dry mesquite, every distant caw of a crow felt pointed, intentional. It was nearly midday when they reached the bluff. From there, the land dropped into a slow basin, flat and cracked, with a thin ribbon of green slicing through the dust. A spring true as Eli had promised. A single cottonwood stood crooked beside it, branches bare but stubborn. Clara climbed down, boots sinking into the brittle earth. She walked to the edge of the water, knelt, and touched it with her fingers. Cool, living, Eli joined her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Could build the house right there, soils darker closer to the roots. Clara stood, so we build. They spent 3 days camped beside the spring, hammering posts, marking out the space where walls would rise. Eli dug a trench for water runoff, and Clara drove stakes into the corners, measuring each step with an eye that missed nothing. There was no room for softness in labor like this. But still, in the quiet that passed between them, the shared weight of the shovel, the calloused brush of his hand near hers, there was something tender being shaped too. By the 4th day, the frame of the house stood in place, skeletal against the sky. That night they ate beside the fire, sweat-slicked and sore. Eli talked of planting. Clara listened, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The moon was rising when she spoke. He'll come, Graves, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Eli didn't flinch. Then we'll meet him here. Clara stared at the fire. He's not a man you meet. He's a storm. He doesn't care what he burns. Eli tossed another branch on the flames. You're not who you were when he had power over you. Clara met his eyes, her voice rough. You don't know who I was. No, he said, soft, but I know who you are now. She didn't answer. The wind shifted, curling smoke around her boots. Later, when Eli slept, Clara walked to the edge of the basin alone. The stars overhead pulsed steady and cold. She knelt in the dust and pressed her palm flat to the earth. Don't let him find me gentle, she whispered. Not until I choose to be. The land offered no reply. Only a rustle of wind through the grass, and the long, low howl of something moving far beyond sight. 3 days later, the first warning came. They were in town for supplies. Clara carried salt and beans in her arms. Eli haggled over nails with the blacksmith. When she stepped outside the store, she saw it, carved into the wooden post by the steps. A brand. The same twisted V-shape her brother had worn burned into his shoulder when Graves claimed him. Clara stared at it, heart hammering. The wood was fresh cut, still bleeding sap. She didn't scream, she didn't even speak. She turned and walked back inside, placed the goods on the counter, and nodded to Eli. We need to go. He saw her face and didn't ask why. The ride back to the basin was swift and wordless. That night, Clara unpacked the rifle. She laid it across her knees, checked every round. Eli lit the lantern, his face grim but steady. Could be someone else, he offered. No, she said. He's here. They set a watch that night, switching every few hours. When Clara wasn't watching the dark, she was staring at the land they'd claimed. This fragile beginning, this promise still half-born. She thought of the cottonwood by the spring, how it grew though the earth around it cracked and split. How it held fast. When her shift came, she sat beside the fire, listening. The desert was still, but peace, she knew now, was a kind of fight too, and hers was far from over. Dawn rose mean and red, a blood-lit sky pulling itself up over the ridgeline like a warning. Clara stood at the edge of the basin, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her eyes sweeping the eastern plain. Nothing stirred but the dust. Yet her gut twisted with knowing. It wasn't just a matter of if any more. Only when. Eli came up behind her, still buttoning his shirt, the line of fatigue etched beneath his jaw. We got time to finish the roof before sun's too high, he said, not asking whether she'd slept. He already knew. They worked until midday, laying planks, driving nails, the sweat running down their backs in rivulets. There was something almost holy in the labor. As if they could hammer hope into the beams, press trust into the joints. As if shelter meant more than wood and wire, it meant the courage to build in a world that owed them nothing. But by late afternoon, Clara spotted the dust trail. Far off, low and fast, curling up from the hardpan like breath from a wound, riders, at least 3, maybe 4. Eli followed her gaze. "We got an hour, maybe." Clara didn't speak. She tied her hair back, pulled on her duster, and retrieved the rifle. The barrel gleamed dully in the slanting light. "What do you want to do?" Eli asked. Clara turned to him, eyes steady. "We stand." They didn't hide. Clara wouldn't grant Graves that satisfaction. She sat plain on the porch, boots planted firm, the rifle resting across her thighs. Eli stood behind her, shotgun cradled in one arm. The riders arrived in a thunder of hooves and grit. 4 men, dust-covered, mean-eyed, and at their center, astride a black gelding, was Graves. He hadn't changed. Still wore that snakeskin coat, the collar high, hiding the web of scars along his throat. His face was leaner maybe, eyes more hollow, but the cruelty sat in him like bone, unchanging, permanent. He dismounted slowly, his boots striking the earth with a sound like judgment. The others waited behind him, tense and silent. "Well, well," Graves said, removing his hat with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Ain't this a picture? Miss Clara Price, sittin' pretty on her own porch like a respectable woman." Clara didn't rise. "Don't call me that." He chuckled. "You got another name now, something softer, I reckon." Eli stepped forward, voice low but firm. "You've made your point. Say what you came to say." Graves didn't even glance at him. His gaze stayed fixed on Clara. "I came for what's mine," he said. "You ran off with more than your shadow, girl. You took what you owed." "I owed you nothing," she said. He tilted his head. "Your brother would have disagreed." The silence that followed was thick and ragged. "You fed him poison," Clara said, voice tight. "Turned him mean, and when he broke, you made him break others." "He chose the bottle," Graves replied. "I just showed him how to drink from it." Her hands curled tighter around the rifle. "You're not taking anything from here," she said. Graves stepped closer. "I don't need to take it. I just need to remind you it ain't yours. Peace, love. This little patch of dirt, that's not for women like you." Clara rose then, slowly. Her voice didn't rise, but it hardened. "You don't know what kind of woman I am." Graves grinned. "I know exactly what kind. The kind who blades easy." The moment hung taut, brittle. Then she raised the rifle, and behind her Eli cocked the shotgun. Graves looked between them, measuring. His smile faltered. He stepped back slowly, the charm draining from his face like ink in water. "All right," he said. "You got grit, but grit runs out, darling, and when it does, I'll be here." He mounted up, his men following suit. And then they were gone, swallowed by the same dust that brought them. That night Clara sat alone by the spring. Her fingers dug into the earth. Her throat felt raw. Eli found her there, quiet and unmoving. "He'll come back," she said. Eli knelt beside her. "Then we'll meet him again." She turned to him. There was no fear in her eyes now, only resolve, and something else, something softer. "You still think peace is possible?" she asked. He reached out, took her hand in his. "I don't think it's something you find. I think it's something you build." Clara looked toward the house. Bare beams, open roof, no walls to hold back the world yet. Still it stood, and so would she. The days that followed moved like cattle through heat, slow, stubborn, always pressing forward. Clara woke early, hands calloused from hammer and rope, shoulders sore from labor. She said little, but there was weight in her silence, like stone laid on stone. The house grew around them, plank by plank, and with it a rhythm. Meals taken in the shade, water drawn in silence, tools passed between them like vows. But the air changed, not suddenly but subtly. The birdsong vanished at dawn. Coyotes came too close at night. Once Clara found a coyote's paw print in the soft dirt beside the porch, not fresh, not old either. Like something had paused there, watching. Eli knew better than to question her unease. He just stayed near, patching the roof while she cut kindling. Their backs turned to each other, but their awareness joined. There was a storm brewing. Not of wind or rain, but of memory and reckoning. 3 nights after the riders came, the spring turned red. Not bright, not all at once. just a shimmer, a tint where the water met the rocks. Clara was the first to see it. She crouched, scooped it up in her hands, sniffed it. Blood, not hers, not Eli. She followed it upstream, Eli close behind. The source was half a mile out, where the spring slipped through a narrow pass of stone and creosote. There in the reeds lay a mule, throat slashed, belly open to the flies. Its brand had been carved off. Clara knelt beside it. The blood soaked deep into the soil, seeping toward the water like a curse. Graves hadn't come back, not yet. But he was circling. That night Clara built a small fire away from the house, just beyond the edge of the clearing. She lit it with dry brush and sat beside it, rifle upright in the dirt. A signal, a dare. Eli stood on the porch, watching her. "You think he's waiting for dark. I think he wants me to flinch." She didn't. Hours passed. The fire shrank to embers. Night wrapped around her shoulders, heavy and watching, but nothing came. Come morning, she found a token left at the edge of the fire pit. A single black feather tied to a strip of rawhide, driven into the dirt with a sliver of bone. She burned it. The next day, they finished the walls. 4 of them solid and plain. Eli whittled a crossbeam to fit above the doorway, and Clara carved the smallest symbol into its base, a sparrow, barely visible, but hers. She stood inside the new frame and ran her fingers along the wood, warm from the sun. The wind had softened, and the air held that rare stillness, the kind just before something breaks. Eli entered with the last of the nails tucked in his palm. "We're close. Closer than we've ever been," she said. He looked at her then, not with hope, but with a kind of reverence, like she was something carved from the land itself, rough, enduring, shaped by fire but still standing. "I'll stay," he said. "No matter what comes." Clara turned to him, "Even if what comes is me." His answer didn't come in words. He stepped closer, pressed his forehead to hers, and breathed with her. Slow, grounded, the kind of silence that held more truth than any vow. At dusk, the desert gave them a gift. Rain, just a whisper at first, then a steady patter on the roof, darkening the dirt, washing the blood from the rocks upstream. Eli stood under the eaves and laughed like he hadn't in months. Clara stepped out into it bareheaded, arms wide, letting it soak her through. It wasn't redemption, but it was grace. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Clara felt the stirrings of something she hadn't dared to name since Missouri, belonging. The rain passed before midnight, and with it the last of the quiet, because just before dawn she heard the hoofbeats, slow, steady, not many. This time Graves didn't send riders ahead. This time he came alone. He rode in just as the night broke open, a thin blue light spilling across the horizon like the desert exhaling. Graves sat high in the saddle, back straight, as if he belonged to the land more than the road behind him. He wore no coat this time, no hat, just the dust and blood of distance clinging to his skin, a revolver at his hip, dull with use. Clara watched him come from the porch, Eli at her side. She held no rifle now, only a long hunting knife at her belt, and the stillness of a woman with nothing left to fear. Graves stopped 10 paces out, his horse pawing at the dry ground. He didn't dismount. "You've done well," he said, voice low and almost admiring. "A house, a man, roots." Clara didn't answer. He looked at Eli, then back to her. "Ain't you tired of pretending?" "I'm tired of ghosts," she said. "So unless you came to bury yours, you best turn back." Graves laughed, rough and hollow. "You think a new life forgives an old one, that building this little shack makes you clean." "No," she said, "but I didn't come out here to be clean. I came to be whole." He dismounted, slow and deliberate. The revolver stayed at his side. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," he said. "You tried," she said. "You failed." "I failed your brother, too." Clara stepped off the porch. The knife glinted once at her hip, a flicker of silver in the dawn. "You twisted him," she said. "Told him what kind of man he was until he started believing you. You made his death a lesson." "He was weak. He was kind," she said. "Until you broke him." Graves took a step forward. "You think you're different? You're not. You've got blood on your hands, too." She didn't flinch. "I know." Eli's voice broke the stillness. "You can ride away. No one here's looking for more blood." Graves turned slowly, and for the first time he looked tired, older than he had any right to be. "There's no peace for people like us," he said. "Not out here, not anywhere." Clara drew the knife. Not raised, just held it firm. "Then maybe you're not looking hard enough." The wind picked up, a long, steady breath across the plain. Somewhere nearby, a sparrow lifted from a branch, wings cutting the morning stillness. Graves looked at her one last time, and something in him cracked, not loud, not final, just a shift, a fracture. He turned without a word, mounted, and rode west, not fast, not angry, just gone. Clara stood at the edge of the spring, the blade still warm in her hand, not from use, from memory. She let it fall into the water. Eli came to her, his hand finding hers. "What now?" he asked. She looked at the house, still raw, still rising. "But real, we finish," she said. They planted by moonlight days later, rows of beans, corn, a few stubborn squash seeds. Clara worked barefoot, sleeves rolled, her hands deep in the living dirt. She could still feel Graves at her back, the past pressing close, but it didn't own her anymore. It never had. At night, they slept beside each other without speaking, and in that silence 1,000 promises were kept, not for peace. Not for forgetting, but for staying. And when the rains came again, they did not run. They stood beneath the downpour, hands joined, and let the desert write them new.